This is John Gilroy from the Federal Tech Podcast.
And I'm Josh Brodbent with BeyondTrust Software.
Today, we're going to talk about privileged access management. Hit the music, Claude.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is Josh Brodbent, Regional Vice President, Solution Engineering for a company called BeyondTrust. And we're going to delve into something called privileged access management. And it's a topic that needs to be brought up because we're in the world of the hybrid cloud, the multiple cloud, public cloud, private cloud, and everyone's concerned about identity here, especially with these initiatives that involve zero trust architecture. So I'm going to jump right in here, Josh. I heard about your company from a previous guest, and I thought to bring you in because I've never heard of you. Maybe you can give us a nutshell, a 30-second description of what BeyondTrust is all about.
Yeah, sure. So BeyondTrust is about intelligently protecting identity access, especially specifically around privileged access accounts. So what we want to make sure of is that those accounts that are privileged, such as admin accounts or network accounts, those types of accounts are secure both inside and outside. We want to make sure that those particular accounts have the ability to be used by the administrators that are there, while at the same time their password and credentials are secure. So we want to make sure that there is as little threat vector as possible across all of those privileged accounts that may be inside a network to manage that particular network.
My wife went to Oklahoma, and she follows the team year in, year out. And whenever they have a winning season, everybody's an Oklahoma fan. Yay! But when they have a tough year, no one's a fan. And I see this thing happening with privileged access management. I've been doing interviews about federal technology since 2006. And, I know companies who've been around since then. All of a sudden, you go to their website and they say, privileged access management. It's like when I went to your website, it wasn't a bolt-on. It's like, no, we've been doing this since the beginning. Is that right?
That is right. So we actually have over 70 different patents in this particular space. We actually have patents going all the way back to the 90s. And I know some of the listeners will go, hey, look, this wasn't a thing in the 90s. Well, early 90s, we had the advent of Linux systems, Linux servers, and we basically had the progression of sudo and sudo type elevation commands, and we needed a better way to manage that. So we actually have some patents around that, moving all the way up into current. So this is something that we've been doing for a very long time. This is not a side thought for us. This is not something that we've thought about as an afterthought, but it has definitely been a core focus of who we are for the length of our business.
So if you look at the length of your business, you've been out there screaming in the wilderness, and all of a sudden we have COVID hit. We have the federal government with a move towards remote access, different type of cloud. And all of a sudden, BeyondTrust is in the headlines here because all of a sudden you have a lot of deep experience with this, and they can rely on you in providing information about access management from soup to nuts. So it really positions yourself real well now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely been a change the last few years. We have found ourselves at kind of the forefront of this conversation, both from a privileged access management perspective and a remote access perspective. When COVID hit in March of 2020, it didn't seem like the work was going to stop from a remote access perspective for a while. And it didn't. And we've definitely been having these conversations about how to secure remote access. People didn't know what to do. It was amazing how little preparation had gone into or thought had gone into, work from home. We had state governments calling us going, we're not prepared for this. We need a solution, by this weekend to be able to have all of our workforce work from home. So it definitely put us in the forefront of that conversation. And now as we are on the backside of that, not only the work from home conversation, the remote access conversation, but also that privilege access and zero trust conversation around how do we handle this from an MFA perspective? How do we handle this from a perspective of zero trust and a passwordless movement, right? That's kind of happening. Erin, who is our federal marketing director, she and I have been putting in a lot of hours supporting conversations all across the country in this particular topic. And we regularly see rooms at conferences that are standing room only as we have these conversations, and we're constantly invited back. And that is, I think that's definitely a pointed moment towards the topic and the timeliness of the topic. They're certainly not coming to hear me speak. They're coming because this is important right now, and we find ourselves kind of at the forefront of it. So,
well, someone's coming to hear you speak. ATARC has got a whole working group on zero trust, and I think you run it, don't you?
So I am the industry chair for the ATARC working group on zero trust.
So I think, come on now, let's talk about truthfulness here. And I think I went there this morning and I saw the members of the group. This wasn't some old boys club out of Silicon Valley. No, this is people from the federal government. This is people from the industry. This is someone like you who's trying to herd the cats, and everyone's get a chance to talk about what they need. And when you talk about listening, I think that's listening in a small group like that, 6-8 people in a room, a Zoom call. Boy, you can learn so much more than a big conference with 100 people in a room, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I'm going to absolutely give credit where it's due. As the industry chair there, it has been an eye-opening experience to listen to the government chairs talk in that group. They do a ton of work there. They do a ton of that research and organization themselves. It's honestly, they kind of make that show what it is. So I don't want to take anything away from the government chairs that help with that group. But as we have conversations around zero trust, as we have conversations around the things that they do, they definitely, it's definitely something that we have had to have conversations around and work through, from Biden's executive order all the way through, guidance that CISA has put out just a month ago. It's something that constantly has been at the forefront of government. And as one of my coworkers said not too long ago, it's a place where the government is almost leading the public sector in this particular space here recently, rather than the reverse, right? So with the way that they're handling zero trust architecture with NIST, with CISA putting out maturity models around it, and having the conversation about privilege access management and how important that is to it. It's 100%, a spot where the government is actually kind of putting together a plan for this, which is exciting. I
went to your website, BeyondTrust.com, and then it dawned on me, zero trust. Well, you were Beyond Trust before zero trust was even topical here. Anyway, BeyondTrust.com. And what it says is you protect identities, you stop threats, and you deliver dynamic access. Now, I know a little bit about role-based access, a little bit about attribute-based access, but dynamic access, I haven't maybe caught up to. Maybe you can catch up to what that means.
Right. So the concept around dynamic access is the thought that it's not just about your role or an attribute, but it's also about understanding what you're doing with your access, where you are, location, time of day. So we want to respond dynamically to when you're making that request. For instance, if this is a normal request for access that you make during the course of your work, during the day, 9 to 5, you're sitting at your desk, we're going to probably have a lower level of workflow for you to step through to be able to authenticate for that. If all of a sudden it's 2 a.m. and you're accessing via VPN from China, all of a sudden this might throw off some red flags, and we're going to require some manual approvals before you get access to the things that you need access to. So we're going to dynamically adjust the appropriate level of permissions, the appropriate level of workflows that you have to do to authenticate, based on where you are and what we would perceive, or the software would perceive to be the threat level that you represent at that moment, which the same person can represent a significantly different threat level regardless of where you are. So
I guess everyone has studied a little bit about Japan and maybe learned about their manufacturing process. And one of the big innovations in the 70s and 80s was just-in-time delivery. And so they could manufacture things efficiently because it was just in time. And I think people today are appropriating that term from, the type of manufacturing system in Japan. They talk about just-in-time access. And so a platform or a system that is designed to allow access quickly, it would fit in time with it. I think they have even an acronym now, JIT. So just in time is talked about a lot in the federal government, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea here is pretty simple and honestly straightforward. What we want is for people to be able to do their jobs. But if they require an elevated set of permissions to do their jobs, we want to deliver those set of permissions while not allowing those permissions to sit vacant. And what I mean by that is if they need those permissions for 20 minutes of the day, we don't want to sit for 7 hours and 40 minutes where that account's not being used, that permission's not being used, where essentially it becomes or represents a potential threat or something that a threat actor can use to have a breach or to have lateral movement around. So what we want is a situation where they have access for exactly how long they need it. And however long that may be, we don't want to impede the mission work that they're doing. We don't want to impede the job function that they're doing. But then when they're done with that, we want to make sure that that access is appropriately removed so that we just don't have those extra credentials or those extra things floating around out there. So that's kind of the concept there. Same with, the manufacturing concept, right? It's about making sure that you have inventory hitting the floor just in time to assemble the component, and you're not sitting on a bunch of extra inventory, right? Well, this is that, but from a security concept.
So, Josh, you obviously listened to Govies at ATARC, and throughout your career, you've listened to a lot of Govies, I'm sure. And so, I don't want to bring up this topic, but how do people fail at access control? What's the biggest failure point here?
There's a lot of ways that people fail. And really, I think when we talk about access control, a few of the biggest things that happen is number one, a lack of understanding or planning. Understanding what we're trying to achieve, how we're trying to achieve it, and then planning for what that's going to look like in a future state so that, as I said a few minutes ago, so that your mission is still achievable. When you begin to plan for access control, you can make the mistake of putting security so much at the forefront of it that you are not allowing your admins to do their job. And before this, I ran an MSP, so I sat in the seat of doing the daily admin chores. And as an admin, I can tell you, if something gets in my way of doing my job, I will find a way around it. So when you're looking at access control, if you're not focused on the user experience of the tool, you will absolutely fail at delivering access control. That's number one. Number two is something that is as old as admin permissions themselves, and that is that idea of permission creep, right? As you get friends inside your IT department, it's really easy to say, hey, look, I need permissions for this one thing. And so a buddy who is an admin of that all of a sudden adds your permissions to this next thing. And the next thing you know, you have 20 people who are domain admins, and none of them are actually Active Directory admins just because they needed permission to one particular attribute. So as they handle access control, we see a lot of that. We see a lot of pushback around, anything else. We see a lot of pushback around change, right? So people have been doing access control similar or the same way for 15 years, and they don't want to see it doing anything different. And they see a tool that's designed to go in the middle as something that's designed to impede their work. And it's not. So a lot of times we'll see a lot of resistance in deployment as they're attempting to work through it. just because they're afraid of that change. They're afraid of those business processes. And I mean, I guess that's another thing that really impedes kind of the entire access control conversation is we've put in workflows and business processes to handle how we did things 20 years ago. And as we're implementing new tools, we don't want to have conversations about those business processes. To match the tools that we have. And so sometimes those are required. And as you well know, people in government they're really easy to change things. And I'm saying that sarcastically. We still use manuals in the Army from 50 years ago for procurement. So, getting people to change business processes and workflows to match what it's going to look like in a zero trust environment is a challenge sometimes.
If you're listening to this podcast and want to hear more about maybe a salvation variation on this, you may want to listen to episode 25, Controlling the Hybrid Cloud, with Rob Carey from Cloudera. This morning, I went to Federal News Network, and lo and behold, you wrote an article for them a couple months back. And in the article, you talked about multi-factor access, MFA. And shocking news, I think you said that MFA may not be enough for some access control. What's your take on that?
Well, in probably my biggest bit of prophecy yet.
Claim it. You better claim it, buddy.
Yeah. I wrote that article. And in the last month and a half, we've seen two different major breaches where people have leveraged a form of social engineering that I like to call MFA fatigue. To successfully breach. They've been corporate customers. One happened at Cisco in August. One happened last month at Uber. Those wonderful little, I'm going to spam your MFA thing until you think that it's you and you're going to accept it. And I actually talked a little bit about this on a systems integrator roundtable about a month ago. What I'm most worried about around MFA and the reliance on MFA as this kind of faux passwordless solution. Hey, look, we're going to rely on that second factor of something you have rather than the things that you know. That's the idea. We're going to skip the thing you know. We're going to go straight to the thing that you have, right? And I hesitate to say this sometimes, but I'm going to say it. We're assuming that our user base is smart enough and steady enough to handle the power that comes with that. It's been attributed to many different people. The way that I heard it attributed was to a park ranger at Yellowstone that said the challenge with making bear-proof trash cans is that there's significant overlap between the smartest bear and the dumbest tourist that visits the park. And
you probably graphed that out.
So, it's the challenge we have in IT security comes to that. When we go back to MFA for security, as much as it is something that I firmly believe in fact, I probably have it too much done because I have even the 2FA app on my phone is YubiKey secured. So I have to plug the YubiKey into my phone before the little OTP app will appear on my phone. You are assuming that at some point, people are going to not be overwhelmed with this MFA fatigue. They're in the middle of doing their work. They're getting 1,500 pushes from 1,500 different apps. And we're assuming that they're going to just know that they have to click no every time, right? And that they need to report that instead of just thinking, oh, well, I'm doing my work, so it must be re-authenticating in the background or whatever it is. People who do tech understand that. People who do finance and not tech may not understand exactly how that works. And relying on that is going to be a challenge in the future. And the truth is that we're all susceptible to these weird things in weird ways. This is an anecdote that happened last night. There's a table in my living room that we set up to play board games sometimes. And my son was studying with his mom, doing some flashcard review. And so I had taken my laptop into the kitchen and I had left my wireless mouse on the table. And my son fidgets a lot. He takes after his dad. So I'm working on my laptop and all of a sudden my mouse starts moving. And, I'm kind of looking around for a second. I'm like, did I touch my touchpad? What's going on? What happens 3 or 4 more times, and I just turn off my computer. I'm like, somebody is in my computer.
Attacked.
I have no idea what's going on. I just straight turn off my computer.
That's an insider threat, buddy. Insider threat.
but that's the way, that's the way security guys are trained, right? Like, I don't know what this is until I figure out what it is my computer's turning off.
Yeah.
And so I walk in the living room and I looked at my wife and I was like, I have a problem with my laptop. Like, I don't know what it is. And my son, who's in 8th grade, looks at me and he holds up the mouse and he's like, is this still connected to your computer?
Huh.
And I was like, you little brat. But, it's an anecdote of, I'm an IT professional of 25 years, right? And in that moment, it's my son that's unknowingly playing a prank on me. But I have no idea what's going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is panic, right? Yeah. Well, luckily, my instincts are to panic in one particular direction. I'm not sure our end users are trained to do the same thing.
And so what you're suggesting is maybe a safety net would be there where it prevents some of these things from happening. And so one way to manage privileged access controls with some kind of a platform, a foundation.
Right, exactly. So, yeah. The concept that, hey, look, this isn't just about let's install some MFA, but it's actually about let's have some dynamic access control and understand that we're not going to push MFA every time if you're sitting at your desk. That way, if you're sitting at your desk and you get an MFA prompt, you can look at it and go, hey, that's not supposed to happen. So we have a problem. Those kinds of things.
If you've listened this far in the podcast, you've maybe piqued your interest. So how do you compare? Why are you folks different? Well,
there's a few ways that we're different. And I alluded to it earlier in the podcast. The first thing is we put the user experience of privileged access absolutely first. A month ago, I spent a week with our UX team. So we have an entire team of developers and researchers and analysts dedicated entirely to the user experience, doing research, doing A/B testing, all of those things. And I spent a week with them, having conversations with them about, ways that we could support them, ways that we could improve. Because as a company, we believe that having a user experience that almost doesn't exist, that doesn't interfere with the mission that allows people to do their jobs, is the best way to handle privileged access. And similar to that, we want to make sure that if someone does invest in a privileged access solution, that they're able to get up and running as fast as possible. We want to make sure that as we deliver these solutions, they get the fastest time to value on the market. And those are all things that we invest heavily in, that we support in every aspect of our business. So when people ask us how we're different, the first thing that I always go to is our focus on the user experience, and that stems from us as a company and our culture as a people of wanting our users and believing in the concept of what we do and our users to be secure and still able to do their work in a way that is a pleasant experience, or at least not a painful one.
Well, 25 years, managed services, a lot of experience in cybersecurity. Where's it all headed in 5 years? Where do you think? Are people going to accept this, or something bad going to happen before they make a transition to zero trust architecture and managing their access?
I think people, I'm at least seeing modicum of support for this. I think people are hitting that moment of they understand it has to be done. They understand they have to plan for it. They understand that they have to get it implemented. So I think we're going to see a lot more of it over the next 5 years. I think we're going to see a lot of these solutions kind of drawing together to present a cohesive kind of zero trust solution that fits together. I say it a lot in the talks that I give, that zero trust is an architecture. NIST released 800-207. It's a concept. It is absolutely not just like one silver bullet product. So the thing that I think we'll see out of it over the next 5 years is more industry collaboration, because we understand that as a set of products, we have to work together or the customers don't achieve zero trust, because it has to be unified. It has to work together. It has to present data together. But yeah, I think we're going to see a decent amount of adoption over the next 5 years for zero trust architecture and privileged access management. And then again, I think we're going to end up having more and more conversations about MFA and it as a solution, and whether or not as we add that as a permanent fixture to every type of security that we do, whether or not that is a solution that there is human tolerance for, and whether or not we need to adjust that in a different way.
Well, I'm taking notes. I wrote down MFA fatigue. I'm going to contact the people at the Library of Congress and see if we can get a patent on that or a copyright. and some have to give you a nickel every time they say it, but it fits appropriately, because I never thought of that perspective. I thought the attack vector was using the public phone network. I never thought of the vector was just the task itself of multi-factor authentication. Well, if you enjoyed this interview, please like it and share it with friends. You've been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Josh Brodbent, Regional Vice President, Solution Engineering at BeyondTrust.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.